How the Monsterverse Godzilla Lost His Identity, an essay about Godzilla 2014 and King of the Monsters by Ed Derick on Monsterverse Reddit. Discussion. To celebrate the 9th anniversary of Gareth Godzilla, aka Gary Goji, I decided to make up this post where I do a breakdown on why the upgrade Godzilla got in King of the Monster might have done more harm than good. Before I begin, I just want to make it clear. If you enjoyed the redesign, that's completely fine. I'm not gonna fight you about it. This is all just a matter of taste, preference. I'm only explaining my opinion here. Let's begin by talking about why Gary Goji's design stands out from the previous designs. Then we'll move on to how King of the Monster changes it, and why I think those changes stole its identity. We all know that Godzilla being changed a lot throughout his movies. The Showa era had a new suit every movies, pretty much, only being consistent with the head designs by the last few movies. The Heisei and Millennium eras had a lot of more consistency, with the exception of 98 and GMK. We don't have to go over 1990, 98. I think everyone is tired of hearing the same arguments. Then we got Gary Goji. At first glance, what makes him different from the others is the size of his eyes. This was done on purpose because Gareth didn't want his Godzilla to be cartoonish. The movie was going to be more serious and grounded than previous entries. The second thing is the shape of his head. It's much more angular and sharp because it was based on birds of prey, bears and dogs. Quick comparison with other incarnations. Gareth Goji's head is more blocky, squared, less chubby and bulbous than the previous one. His skin is also different. Instead of the rugged tree bark-like texture from the majority of the Toho movies, Gary Goji has a more realistic scales and osteoderms based on crocodiles, marine iguanas, and marine turtles. You have to steal from nature. Nature had billions of years to design Godzilla. We had 1 year by Gareth Edwards. There's also details to add some sprinkle of realism. The partially webbed hands and the visible gills on the neck. These also makes him different from the others. Then we have the most defining feature of Gary Goji, the dorsal plates. According to Gareth, they went through many designs, mostly based on fins. The dorsal plates of Stegosaurus, and of course the classic maple leaf shape of the classics. But in the end, they settled for these. Gary chose an angular, broken slate look, with his reasoning being that his trait made more sense, as if the fins growing out of Godzilla are brittle and break. These dorsal plates are just instantly recognizable now. Not to mention, when he's in the water, they look like mountains rising from the ocean, and it's such an epic imagery. Gary Goji's roar is something we have never heard before in the Godzilla franchise. The sound designers did try to use the same method Akira Ifukube to create the classic 54 roar, but weren't satisfied with the results. So they kept experimenting with metal friction, using dried ice to supercool certain metals to make it contact and vibrate, producing a sound similar to shrieking and bellowing. For the iconic sound at the end of the roar, they manipulated the sound of a potted plant raked across concrete, then some pitch changing here, some speed changing there, until they arrive at the roar we know today. There's a lot more to go on about Gary Goji's, but I'll stop here. I think that's good enough for the point I'm gonna bring up. I'll close off this section with this. Gareth wanted this Godzilla to look good from every angle because we were going to be living with this design for the rest of our lives. Now we have Doggy Goji. First obvious change what about him are his dorsal plates, which are literally a Control C, Control V of the 1955 plates. And when I say literally, I mean it. That's what Mike said he did. He photoshopped the 1954 plates onto Gary Goji's and went from there. According to Mike, he did this because it looks like something nature would create. But I think it's obvious the real reason here is nostalgia. So, Monsterverse Godzilla lost his unique dorsal plates, only to get the classic one, because in Mike's mind, I guess we can't have a different Godzilla design. We need to keep copying and pasting the previous one. And I'm not gonna be honest here. I'm gonna be honest here. For a long time, I was a huge fan of those. I kinda still am. They're a guilty pleasure of mine. Not for nostalgia, but just for how good they look from certain angles. But sometimes they do look oversized and overly dramatic. Among other change, we have a bigger head. Or at least that's what they claim, because in proportion to the body, looks kinda small. Anyway, a thicker neck, longer legs, sharper claws on the feet, and the toes more spread apart, with each other broader shoulders, a thicker tail with a round tip instead of a pointed tip. It seems the route was bigger and sharper, which I guess I'm okay with, but why though? If it ain't broken, don't fix it. I never had a problem with Gary Goji looking skinny or weak or anything like that. Also, I don't get the point of changing the sauropod-like feet to sharp claws. Just why? He doesn't even use them for combat. I hate that they made the tail smaller in proportion with the body. So you increase his height and his weight, but then make the tail, you know, the things animal uses for balance shorter. It should have stayed the same size, if not even bigger to compensate. They also removed the pointy tip, which the only reason I can think of is to look more like the Toho designs, especially the Showa era. So it appears what the mindset they went with Doge Goji was the classic sequel syndrome. Bigger means better, and of course, nostalgia. He needs to be taller, heavier, more muscular, bigger dorsal plates, bigger claws, shorter tails for dumb reasons. Then we have the roars, which just like the dorsal plates are my guilty pleasure because when I heard the roars at the opening of King of the Monsters, I was so surprised. I cheered even though the movie had just started it. Dog Dogarty decided to bring back the classic Toho roar, again because nostalgia, and he even went out of his way to retcon Gary Goji's sounds. So now we have the classic sounds, even in flashback to 2014, which almost feels petty on Mike's part, in my opinion. We are lucky he kept Gary Goji's raw, because I'm sure he would have removed it completely if he could. And to make things worse, in some moments, he just plays both raw at the same time, which creates this cacophony. It's like there's two creatures roaring at the same time. Why can't he just pick one? And again, no technical reason because it's just nostalgia good, new stuff bad. And lastly, the bioluminescence. It's kinda cool, it's realistic, but I got tired of it by now. It's obnoxious. GVK somehow managed to make it worse. This meme illustrated it perfectly. Next Godzilla movie 20XXX. In 2014, the build up for the atomic breath is so good. By that point in the movie, you're already tired of the darkness in the screen, but suddenly You see this blue glow in the smoke, and it keeps increasing as Godzilla's silhouette rises and gets the atomic breath scenes. Now it feels so earned after so much dark and grey throughout the movie. We see it once again in the Kiss of Death, and it was just as cool. And it was cool because this blue glow, this color palette, is a rarity in the movie. It's a rare gem. But now, it's just everywhere. In pretty much every scene Godzilla shows up. It lost all its magic and awe factor. I just wanted Godzilla, not a Christmas tree. To make it even worse, just like the roar, it's a retcon. Godzilla was always able to do this. It's always been his intimidation display. As if roaring loud enough to burst your eardrums wasn't intimidating enough. Why wasn't he glowing in 2014? Who cares? Mike certainly didn't. So by now, Monsterverse Godzilla lost a lot of his uniqueness in favor of nostalgia bait. He can't have his own dorsal plates because, God forbid, we have something new in the franchise. He can still have his own roar, but we need to play the classic roar in the background to make that nostalgia. He needs to be bigger, fatter, more muscular, with bigger claws because Gary Goji was a wimp and skinny, I guess. He can't have a pointy tail either because for some reason it was very important to Mike that his tail looked like the rubber suits from the 60s, and he has to be glowing all the time because Mike thinks the fan base is traumatized by the dark colors apparently. At this point, it's like the authority didn't want the Monsterverse to be about Monsterverse Godzilla. He just wanted to show a Godzilla in it. He butchered Gary Goji in favor of his own nostalgia, because I don't remember the fandom asking for these changes, and I respect Wingard for wanting to keep Goji unchanged for GVK, and his reasoning makes total sense to me. Due to the premise of the movie, Monsterverse Godzilla fighting Monsterverse King Kong, he wants to keep the characters recognizable, not change what the audience are accustomed with. He even removed the Toho roar, allowing us to experience the clean version of Gary Goji's roar. Wingard's approach makes me think that if he had made King of the Monsters as well, we could have gotten this gem in GVK. Edit by Obamas on Reddit. So yeah, this is why I believe King of the Monsters, Michael Dougherty, stole the Monsterverse Godzilla's identity in favor of shoving nostalgia bait and what he thinks is fan service, when in reality, it's just butchering of Gareth's work and the removal of his creativity. I hope that Wingard keeps Godzilla unchanged in New Empire. Tone down that stupid glowing blue things, make it feel like Gary Goji is still alive in there somewhere. Thanks for reading. Oh well, I'm sorry, Mr. Ed Derick, me reading this, but you're not gonna like what you see. Oh well, maybe we'll see when I decide to read your other post.